missing all the speakers.
It's okay, I can speak for an hour. I have trouble stopping this.
Watching that. Come on, when they take a slide.
Trouble something.
I won't know the presents coming.
What was the present?
I don't know what you're doing.
Tom. Where do you?
Sorry, I work here at the PITS, the corporate responsibility network for almost 2 months now.
Okay.
Yeah, last year I used to work for cargo ferry. Industry. It's a sustainability. Before that, I used to work for the NTT, Technical Research Center. My background is forestry. We can say, wait around. Yeah. Give me my card. Remember to take them with me.
There you go.
Thank you. Ajattelin, että pitäisikö siellä välillä katsoa niin niitä ohjeistaan mennä päin? Puhuja. Joo, puhujatkin on puhujia.
What time do we start?
2:30. Yeah, we've got 2 minutes already. Ja näille sun on tossa valmiina, se vaan laitat toi päälle, niin sitten eiks niin? Mä voin laittaa. Magic touch.
Are you doing that?
Yeah.
Joo.
Aina ei koskee siihen.
Ei katsotaan myös, että mä laitas
Sure.
pois.
Yeah, it is. Yesterday was the main reason we came. For the sound.
Yes. Mä hoidan näin, joo.
A different type of listening. So I don't know what come on here, but yesterday it was a nice sight
Ja sit sun on varmaan helpottaa
potentially.
siinä olla.
Yeah, it's just to find a time that works for everyone.
Tehdäänkö tiipäin vielä, että tuleekohan se?
No, but I can get
Niin, koska jos sä
nine out of
tulet
10 or
tuohon
something.
samalla lailla.
Yeah, I think so. I think
Sitten mä voin samaan aikaan tulla laittaa ne slaidit seuraavaksi.
it's just gets started.
Eteenpäin tuon niin hyvä, että toi ton
Oh no, don't do it.
tähän sitten minä Meidän piti olla viime kello alla. Sä tuut tänne, eiks niin? Okei, no mut joo, ja Riinan kai. Niin, no mä otan kumminkin, mä hoidan tuon tietokoneen. Niin niin sitten mä ottaisin jonkun tuon Skype-selstä. Joo, siellä kävi tässä jo. Mikki. Joo. Istuuko se siellä helpossa vai? Joo, mä juoksen sitten. Ja mä laitan
Sit down here and then we can correct on the mic.
Okay.
siihen aikaan vai ei? Se niinku maksimissaan se 15 minuuttia missään nimessä
Dear audience, dearly welcome to the mini seminar Innovation Extractives, focusing on oil and mining. And we're trying today to illustrate these issues, particularly in the Arctic region. My name is Otto Brun, and I'm working with mineral extraction in the Finnish Association for Nature Conservation, and I'll act as chair in this session. And we have some questions with us from previous business and biodiversity events prepared by the staff for this session. And I think it's worth to read those out to take them with us. So firstly, what are the key findings and policy recommendations from the Arctic Biodiversity Assessment? Secondly, what are the opportunities and strengths of proactively engaging with biodiversity conservation? And what are the challenges? Thirdly, how can responsible oil and mining companies take biodiversity into account in their activities and mitigate their negative ecological impacts? Fourthly, how can businesses work with policymakers and biodiversity-related organizations to enable the business sector to deliver better biodiversity conservation outcomes? Fifthly, are there innovations that contribute to biodiversity and nature protection? Sixthly, are there opportunities for fostering new business models? And what are the future perspectives and the way forward in this area? And finally, what are the recommendations from the sessions? We've got a very impressive panel today, although one panelist is still missing, but we'll hope she arrives shortly. So to introduce them quickly and spare as much time as possible for discussion, we've got with us Mr. Tom Barry, who is Executive Secretary for Conservation of Arctic Flora and Fauna, known as CAF. And he's been one of the people pulling together the Arctic Biodiversity Assessment, which is a very important tool for people working in this area. Then we've got Ms. Ana Alicia Watson Jimenez, who is a biodiversity analyst at Repsol, who will be presenting the view from the oil sector. And thirdly, we've got with us Mr. Warwick Mosters, who is biodiversity manager at the Breers company, and he'll be given their perspective on managing biodiversity, and he has a very long-standing experience in this field for over a decade. So we'll be looking forward to those presentations and hoping that Dr. Mitzi Polisko will yet... Oh yes, she's come. Warmly welcome, please join the stage. So our second presentation will be given by Dr. Mitzi Polisko, who is the principal terrestrial ecologist at GHD. And she'll be focusing today on gas, oil and mining in Southeast Asia. So those are the very involved actors in this sector, and we'll be looking forward to those after some few introductory words by myself. So the question is, when we talk about business and biodiversity, how do we come to focus on mining and oil? I think some key figures will, after some key figures, we will see that as quite self-evident, as the industry's output rose 27-fold during the 20th century, and even faster than output. During 2002 to 2012, we saw production of iron ore globally increasing by 180%, cobalt by 144%, and coal by 44%. And I think the UNEP resource panel has highlighted to us that the land use impact and other impact of these mining projects are similarly increasing. And I think that has given a lot of space for proactive business leaders in this area to bring out proactive solutions as well during the last 10 to 12 years. This is particularly crucial as we estimate that by 2050 the global demand will increase by a further 60%. Demand for minerals measured in gigatons. The other reason for highlighting the issue is that, as Julia Marton-Lefebvre highlights, valuable mineral and important biodiversity seem to have the common habit of sharing the same spaces in a landscape. And this is even highlighted in the fact that the selected natural world heritage sites, 1/3 of them are currently under planning for different extractive projects or under threat. And I think this report by WWF in October 2015 raises the issue that even the select few natural treasures of the globe are implicated by the issue that we're discussing today. There are a number of initiatives, a few of them listed here, and I think we'll hear about them more during the presentations, which have raised the issue of biodiversity and the mining and extractive industries. And I think it's good to highlight that we're on a continuation of the Convention on Biological Diversity space, as well as we're continuing from what went on in Montreal in 2013. In the session today, we'll be using the Arctic as the illustrator of these trends, while also taking in examples from, for instance, Southeast Asia and elsewhere. This is something that I noticed particularly in my own work focusing on extractive industries in the Arctic region, where there has been a new dynamism, to say the least. The issue in the Arctic is further highlighted by the linkages between climate change, biodiversity, and the extractive industries, which are well highlighted in the Arctic Biodiversity Assessment, and which I'm sure we'll hear more about very soon. The session headline is innovation, and I think it will be very interesting to raise the issue and use the space here to see how people in the sector and in business in general sees innovation in the mining sector going forward. And I'm sure we'll be coming back to this in the Q&A part at the end. So thanks a lot for your attention, and I'll be inviting the first speaker. You're very welcome, Tom Barry. Thanks.
Okay, so I was going to say good morning. You can tell I'm still a little bit jet lagged. But my name is Tom Barry, and I work within the Arctic Council and the Executive Secretary for its Biodiversity Working Group, the Conservation of Arctic Flora and Fauna. And thank you. I've been warned to be very brief because I have a tendency to talk for far too long, and I think some people here have heard me speak yesterday as well. But this is our first time participating in this forum, so I find it very interesting to meet the different industries that we encounter. Primarily, we tend to engage with oil and gas industries and, to a lesser extent, shipping and tourism. So it's very interesting now to start to meet people from the mining industry and elsewhere, and to see how we can engage in a dialogue with them with regards to what happens in the Arctic. But when we come to speak of the Arctic, I'm not sure that people tend to have a different understanding of what the Arctic is. And anytime you try to draw a boundary or any sort of defining area in the Arctic, it's very sensitive. But the Arctic, as we describe it within the working group where I work, is this huge red area here. and that covers 32 million square kilometres. People tend to think of the Arctic as primarily marine, but this is actually more or less 57% marine and 43% terrestrial. So a huge area of the Arctic we're discussing is also terrestrial. And that little red dot is where I live in the north of Iceland. So the challenge that we're facing in the Arctic is how do we better harness our knowledge to facilitate a more informed decision making? Or to put it in other words, how do we shorten the response time between when we detect a trend or a challenge in the Arctic and we bring information and relevant policy options and tools to the states and decision makers so that they can respond accordingly. And this is a huge challenge in such a broad area. And what we do within the Arctic Council, and I explain this briefly because this is relevant for how we're now engaging on a mainstreaming dialogue, is that we conduct monitoring of status and trends of biodiversity across the Arctic. We conduct assessments or analysis on the outcomes of that monitoring. We function as the Arctic Data Service Centre, both for the Arctic Council and for other organisations such as OBIS and GBIF and so on. We develop policy options and tools for the Arctic states and organisations, and we work to communicate our findings both to the public and to the states and to involve stakeholders across the Arctic. And one thing that I haven't heard much in the talks today so far is that concerning Indigenous organisations, because the Arctic Council is a unique body and that Indigenous organisations have a seat at the table with the states and they're obliged to consult them in all their decisions and actions that they take. And so that's a unique aspect of the Arctic Council, and I think unique globally. So it means that you have perhaps a better representation of all the various stakeholders at the table when it comes to making decisions on what's happening there. What we are going to discuss today a little bit is, with the Arctic as the background, is the Arctic Biodiversity Assessment. And that's this huge brick of a book which was finalised and improved by the Arctic states in 2013. And since then we've been working to try and figure out how do we take the findings from this scientific work. There were about 250 scientists from across the globe responsible for the findings of this. And as one of the science policy groups in the Arctic Council, our challenge is how do we simplify information or repackage it so that decision makers and also other stakeholders such as industry can actually act and help implement some of the findings of it. So we went from that 700 page document to this. And this document is the policy document for the biodiversity assessment. And it's the primary document which is guiding how Arctic states via the Arctic Council are working with regards to address biodiversity issues in the Arctic at the moment. There were three primary themes in this assessment. There was the significance of climate change as the underlying driver of biodiversity change in the Arctic, the necessity of adopting an ecosystem-based management approach to how we tackle what's happening and understand what's happening in the Arctic, and mainstreaming of biodiversity. How do we incorporate biodiversity principles into the various industrial actions, development actions, all the different stakeholders are conducting in the Arctic. We've just had approved at a ministerial meeting this April this report, which is called Actions for Arctic Biodiversity, and it's an action plan for taking all of the 17 recommendations from the biodiversity assessment and trying to implement them. This is an action plan that's directed not just at the Arctic states and organisations, but also at non-Arctic countries and stakeholders such as industry. I like to show this map because what we're doing in the Arctic has implications for the rest of the globe. As you often hear the phrase, what's happening in the Arctic is relevant elsewhere. And this map shows the flyways for migratory birds that they spend their lifespan annually travelling up and down between different parts of the globe from north to south and back. And these red figures here indicate the rates of decline of shorebird populations along those flyways. And you can see that some of them are quite significant, for example, up to 80–90% in the southeast Australasian flyway. And you can see immediately from this map that no matter how good we are, for example, in Finland at working to conservatively sustain our migratory bird populations, it doesn't matter that much if they're still hunting and killing them down in Southeast Asia. So in order to actually find a sustainable way to manage and reverse such declines in populations, we need to engage all stakeholders, be they non-Arctic states, industries, and Arctic organisations and countries. This is the recommendation that's relevant for our discussions today, because this is the reason that the Arctic Council, the Conservation of Arctic Flora and Fauna, is engaging with this forum and our seminar that we had yesterday. And this recommendation was approved by the states, where they asked the Arctic states to require the incorporation of biodiversity objectives and provisions into all of the Arctic Council's work, but also encourage the same for development activities, for agreements, plans and operations in the Arctic. And they specifically singled out a number of industries in this: shipping, fishing, tourism and mining, but not limited to those. They're just ones that they took out as examples. So to try and figure out how we're going to take those words and turn them into reality, or to ensure some sort of on-the-ground conservation impact, in our action plan for implementing those, we've identified 6 different steps or actions that we need to undertake. These involve strengthening and developing partnerships with industry and others, trying to find creative and innovative solutions to the challenges facing biodiversity, and in a way expanding the responsibility for taking care of biodiversity to all of the various different actors in the Arctic. We need to strengthen collaboration with industry in monitoring. There's an awful lot of monitoring activities undertaken in the Arctic by industry in hard-to-reach places. We need to figure out how we can include the information and findings that they extract and incorporate that into our monitoring program, so that helps inform our policy recommendations and scientific findings. We are embarking on the development of biodiversity principles on how we might incorporate biodiversity objectives into our safeguards. I'll finish quickly. And we need to make monitoring and research results accessible through our Arctic Biodiversity Data Service. So, in essence, we went through a long process of developing this assessment, putting into a form that it was easily understandable by policymakers, and now we're at the other end of that spectrum, trying to take these policy recommendations and find a way that they're easily understandable by stakeholders such as industry. So the reason that we're trying to engage with forums such as this is to try and start a dialogue or create a framework for discussion on how business might be able to help implement or develop some of these recommendations. Because we recognise that in order to make them a reality, we really do need to find a common ground. It's not enough for us to say that, we try and do this, but we need to do it together. And I will finish early to allow more time for questions. Thank you.
Because we need to use the microphones
Okay.
in order to the live stream.
Sorry, I thought they were coming at the end. Sorry.
Can you hear me? Yeah, it seems to be working. So we'll be taking one or two or a couple of questions after each speaker, and then save some time at the end for common discussion. Do we have any questions on the floor?
Don't put your hands up all at once, so it's okay. It's always good that the silence means that business understands everything that's happening in the Arctic and there are no questions.
Yeah, do you concur, one could ask. No questions? I was wondering if you could give us a highlight of a particular species or a particular ecosystem that you could be enhanced by such a cooperation that you enlighten. Give us a concrete picture, please. Because
I referred to migratory birds a while ago, and the East Australasian flyway is that flyway that's experiencing the most dramatic declines in particular shorebird species. There are some species there, such as the spoonbill sandpiper, which 30 odd years ago there was maybe 6,000 breeding pairs. Today there's perhaps a little over 100. And they've been declining at an annual rate of about 25–26%. And unless we find a way to actively implement some effective conservation measures which try and stop or somehow change hunting patterns, coastal reclamation along that flyway, then they reckon that will be the first species to go extinct on that flyway in early 2020s. So that's a good example, perhaps a dramatic one, but one that shows you that if we're to try and affect on-the-ground change, then there's an urgency to it, and it's something that we sort of need to do as a common group as opposed to individuals.
Yeah, we have a question on the ground, please. And if you can please introduce yourself at the start of your question.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. It was excellent. My name is Matt Smith. I'm from the Joint Nature Conservation Committee in the UK. I suppose a number of facets to the question. To what extent were business, industry involved in the production of that report? Has it been well received? And going forward, what do you think are going to be the main challenges for business to reach operating in the Arctic zone?
Well, the way we tried to engage industry in the development of this report was we held a huge stakeholder consultation process, and we had the first Arctic Biodiversity Congress last year. And as part of the development of the agenda and the content of that Congress, we convened an industry advisory committee. And that had representatives from shipping and oil and gas and a number of other industries. And there we tried to engage with them on what were the issues of concern, how we would reflect that in our agenda, and what were the common areas where we would try and move forward. For example, one of the initial ideas was to develop guidelines for biodiversity in the Arctic, but a very clear message came back from all of the different industry consultations that we held that there were enough guidelines, but we needed to take a different approach. So we've been trying to engage quite a lot with industry over that process. They didn't participate as scientists in that sense in the report, but they participated in the in informing the outcomes. And I forget your second part of your question.
The second question was,
Use the microphone, please.
sorry, yeah, the second part of my question was, are there, from the production of this report,
Yeah.
what are the key kind of challenges that are facing industry operating within the Arctic biome?
Well, the report didn't face on the challenges that industry were facing. It's faced on the challenges that biodiversity are facing. And then, based upon those, we identify specific issues or things that we need to address that could potentially be affected by the impacts of industry there. And that then falls into issues like invasive species management, how do we look at marine mammal migratory patterns and things like this.
And we've got one final question here in the first row. You have the floor.
It's more common. I'm Edward Miller from Costa Rica. Actually, this highlights the opportunity we have with the global partnership and other networks. You mentioned the birds being hunted. Actually, most importantly is the ecosystem destruction in these countries,
Yeah.
more than actually the hunting, generally speaking. But the need to network, I mean, you have a beautiful Arctic report that's probably missing half of it with the other ecosystem reports that are actually causing the loss of the birds, and the need to integrate different countries, different regions to be able to develop approaches, even for a specific site as the Arctic, which you think is very isolated, but it's totally interconnected.
Yeah.
So we do need to reach out to different platforms in different stages where we can actually join efforts with other countries to be able to have any strategy, even for a local business that's starting there.
Well, what we've done with regards to migratory birds and South America and down around to the Americas is we formed an initiative called the Arctic Migratory Birds Initiative. And we're actually in the process now, we've identified what the key threats to the priority species that are under challenge along those areas. And we're trying to reach out to those different countries and organisations along that region of the world now to come together in the sort of network that you're describing. So that's something, this has only just been finalised this April, so we're in the process of now starting to implement some of the early actions from it. But you're perfectly correct, it needs to be a cooperative effort.
Thank you, Tom, and thanks a lot for the questions. And I now have the honor to invite Dr. Mitzi Polisko to give her presentation. She holds a Doctor of Philosophy in Forestry and is currently the principal terrestrial ecologist at GHD. And she'll be focusing on Southeast Asia. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon to all of you. And it is indeed a privilege and an opportunity for me to be here, to be involved in this forum. And I thank the organizers of this forum for making it possible for me to be here. English is not my first language, but I hope I'll be able to finish this off effectively. Okay, so, yeah. I thought I'll be able to do some dynamics, but then it's okay. I come from this part of Southeast Asia. So we are now here. So specifically the Philippines. So this one is where I come from. And it's one of the member states. I'm sorry. It's one of the member states of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. The other countries are Borneo, Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos PDR, Malaysia, Myanmar, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. And the ASEAN will have its economic integration in the later part of 2015. And that economic integration has ASEAN has 3 pillars: the ASEAN Economic Community pillar, the ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community pillar, and the ASEAN Political Security pillar. And each of these pillars have their own priority programs. And for the ASEAN Economic Community, it's about connectivity. And connectivity in terms of ICT, the others, physical integration or connectedness. So, this one is about rail infrastructure. They will be connecting the whole mainland of ASEAN, all going to China. And the other part, that's ASEAN Highway Network. So the whole of ASEAN is actually programmed. There's a plan for it to be constructed. And of course, they will be needing the raw materials for that, and it will come from the extractive industries. And they will also need energy. It will come from oil and gas. And so they have plans also of connecting through a power grid network and also the gas pipeline network, all going to China. The ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community is also having this conservation component. And this is where the natural resources and the biodiversity sub-pillar is actually under. So we have the ASEAN Heritage Parks. So the first slide, actually, it's supposed to be, the red dots are where the ASEAN Heritage Parks are located. And these are some of the other initiatives outside of the ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community. So the Heart of Borneo, I think it's the WWF-led project. And around it, because these are mining areas. So if we do not keep the Heart of Borneo protected, there is that high probability of mining encroaching into that heart of Borneo. And the Coral Triangle Initiative is also another initiative that's also covering part of Southeast Asia, specifically the Philippines, part of Malaysia, and part of Indonesia, going to Papua New Guinea and the other countries. And that part of Papua New Guinea is where the Nautilus is going to do seabed mining. So deep seabed mining. Okay, and other initiatives of other groups. This one is Reef-based, actually looking at the protected areas of the, marine protected areas. The lighter yellow ones are unprotected, but the blue ones and the red ones, they are those that are protected. This was taken sometime in 2008. Unfortunately, in 2002, actually in 2002, the other map there shows that this area has the least possibility of being in danger of development. So that was in 2002, the report by Burke et al. Unfortunately, in 2013, this part of Southeast Asia, this South China Sea, has been reclaimed by China. So these ones, and these are now actually, most of them are completed. So the coral reefs there, we are very sure that all of them are gone. And the marine biodiversity. And so actually we call it the West Philippine Sea. When you talk of Filipinos, they would say West Philippine Sea instead of the South China Sea. And a certain part of this area is a common heritage of mankind. So there's that part that, well, while it is a contested area, disputed area, China claiming the red boundary, Philippines is claiming the pink one, the yellow one is being claimed by Malaysia, and the small part there is being claimed by Brunei. And so at this point, there's really no decision as to who is going to own that. And so it is now the common heritage of mankind. So this is everybody's area. And so the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea and the International Seabed Authority is actually the decision for this one is really on their shoulders. Okay, so the marine biodiversity of the West Philippine Sea and the ecosystem services that it offers are affected. And because it's a rich area for oil and gas, and it is the trade route for most of the trade that happens globally. Okay, and this is Halong Bay. The case of Halong Bay is it's a World Heritage Site, and these ones are coal mine sites. So what you see here are actually this awesome view, and yeah, how much of the coal mine and the World Heritage Site will remain, we still do not know. So, okay, the hierarchy of mitigation measures, I'm sure all of you know about this. In the Philippines, we do interpret these ones as something like this one's mitigation, well, the area for avoidance, those that will not be touched or that are specified for other purposes, will have to be protected. For the mitigation, we do, like if we do tree cutting permit approvals, there are conditions in it that when you cut a tree, you give back 300 pieces of seedlings. And so how is biodiversity going to affect that? We have, well, the country has enforced that the mining companies will use indigenous species. So that's one of those mitigation measures. And for the restoration, it doesn't happen, but it's just rehabilitation. We cannot bring back everything, so that we are just to have some trade-offs. And then offsetting. And the offsetting that the Philippines does is like having a national greening program that each country, that each industry will have to comply with, and it becomes an enforced biodiversity offset. And then, so if you get to put them all into a graph, I borrowed this graph from Tecklenburg, and this one's Environmental Protection Enhancement Program, the progressive mine rehabilitation is a part of it. And this is like a contract that a mining company has to, the government approves. So it's for 25 years, renewable for another 25 years. And while you do all the environmental protection enhancement program there, you do the final mine rehabilitation for 10 years after the 25 years. And when you have your area avoided, and this one is your biodiversity, you started with high biodiversity, and because of your activities, your mining has declined, your biodiversity has declined, but eventually when you do your mitigation, it goes up, but it doesn't reach the same level. But then you do offsets. You have your social development and management programs. It's like you are having trade-offs. You give scholarships, you construct roads and bridges and provide for the royalty of indigenous peoples, and these are all legal responsibilities. These are must do by the mining companies. And so the rest of it, if they would really like to be more generous. They can, like most of the industries that are, the companies that are involved in, specifically in the Philippines, they have their philanthropic and ethical projects. So that at the end of the day, the high poverty level that when they come in, it was the situation. Eventually, at the end of the life of mine, it's already, the poverty has been reduced, while the biodiversity is also getting higher than, but not really on the same level as it was originally, as it was in the original situation. So the challenges in ASEAN are actually about knowledge on the EIA, so that it's about community involvement, stakeholders, it's about policies, it's about governance, it's about laws, institutions, and things. And then also the good mining practices that we have, they are enacted into Philippine laws. Okay, so that multi-party monitoring teams, strategic environmental planning, ecosystem services reviews in if they are projects of that involve lenders, so like the International Finance Corporation of the Asian Development Bank. So they have ecosystem services review. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, and then the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative and the ISO 14001, they are already enforced into laws, so that people or companies are actually doing it because it is already a law. And opportunities for fostering new business models, well, there are areas where we have maritime boundary disputes, they can actually just join together to develop the area. Or so that they can have common responsibility for biodiversity. And also corporate sustainability or responsibility over and above what is legal, so that they can be more, they can have more of the social license to operate. And actually, there was also this regional common framework for extractive industry governance in Southeast Asia, but it's still timely for the ASEAN integration. So that's all. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. We have time for one or two questions. Do I see any hands on the floor raised? Not this time. I guess then we'll come back to you at the end to keep our schedule intact. So thanks a lot for that view from Southeast Asia. Some strong dynamics ongoing with also, I think, geopolitical implications. So thank you for bringing that experience to us. And now I want to invite Ms. Alicia Watson Jimenez, who is a biodiversity analyst with Repsol Exploration. So the floor is yours.
Well, good afternoon. English is not my first language, so I want to try dynamics. Well, from the view of the oil sector, I'm going to focus on these three key points. So first, we have to engage with biodiversity. Oil and gas companies have to challenge many reputational risks that are related with oil and gas company depends and impact on the biodiversity and ecosystem services. So this is the key starting point. So we have to recognize that as well we impact on the ecological systems we depend on. So we have to demonstrate a good performance in biodiversity. This is a challenge because there are no indicators. There are no specific and a transparent way to present complex information about how our projects are related with the ecosystems and the communities that are involved in our areas. So this is important, and this is a challenge because scientific communities and companies and governments, we have to develop and improve our tools to present our information and to report this to our stakeholders. This represents also liabilities. We have problems to getting permissions or obtain legal licenses, and also we have uncertainties because there are important gaps in data. We are having many efforts to standardize our baselines and to improve our SEAs and due diligence, but we have to do more, and this is our challenge. But on the other hand, this provides opportunities for oil and gas company to contribute to conservation, to increase our knowledge. So oil and gas company have the possibility to get into remote areas, to get partnership with communities, with scientific communities, with the government, to drive in or address changes. We have to set up and speed up the change because we're involved in participation with initiatives, and we have many guidelines to improve. So this is a key point. We have to build a common language. We have to understand what is happening, the trends, and this it's an opportunity for the companies. So, as I didn't remember the name, but the previous person present, we have the mitigation hierarchy as a tool for management biodiversity risk. But it's true, there are strong examples to the application of this hierarchy, but it's more about the assets of the project. So the companies now have to materialize this tool for their varying local context and incorporate the international targets as well as the national targets in where they are operating. So they have to implement this with an adaptive management from the very beginning of the project. From my experience, the best way is to improve that from the planning of the project. Avoiding and mitigating at the end of the decommissioning of the sites is quite difficult to assess. So the most effective way is from the engineers, the geologists are being planning and assessing the risk of the project. To do or to achieve that, it's important to carry out the dialogue with all the stakeholders, to engage and to participate from the beginning with them. And this represents also to building and training, to ongoing, to have a common language with the directors, contractors, and everyone that will be involved in the project. It's about they have to understand what is the ecological context, what are the biodiversity risks, what are the biodiversity opportunities. If they don't understand that, and they don't put it in their objective, it wouldn't arise that. It wouldn't function. It's about training too. So oil and gas company as part of the problem, yes, but they could be part of the solution. Agreements with institutions, organizations, NGOs, and with governments are space for innovations. Because if everyone is involved, it's more easy to achieve for a solution with the local and international context. It supports efficiency with the risk management. We gain new insights. We have other visualization of the problems and how to get to the solutions from a third part. best practices are important because oil and gas needs to understand that sometimes best practices are more strange or more high or have high standards than the legal requirements. So it's necessary to improve that. And this would enforce regulations in all the countries from the basis of the scientific community. So in Latin America, this is important. Governments need scientific basis to improve their legal requirements. There's not a recipe. We have to be creative to how to present this to the companies and how the company is going to interiorize this in their business model. So we can work with others with many possibilities. There are initiatives, there are partnerships, there are agreements, there are opportunities for research and financial cooperation or support. And this will provide or will raise outcomes that in other way it wouldn't be possible. For example, capacity building in the public and the private sector would be better if everyone or a third part participate in that to show how they are involved, how they are important for realize the contribution of the conservation. It's not only about giving money or be philanthropist in that. It's to be an active participation to make your project fit with the conservation alignments of the government and the international targets. So how my operations, my activities improve that in the operational way. So there's international groups for the oil and gas. For example, is the Oil and Gas Producer Committee for Environmental. There's the PIECA. There's the Proteus Partner. These international groups give practice and expand this from the oil and gas operators, but there are also national initiatives. Both are important because we have the international context, but companies have to work with the national governments also, and the lenders and the other stakeholders. So this national initiative give our landscape approach and integrate all the sectors to make a landscape management. So this is important for oil and gas company. Our resource is under the superfice, it's under the soil, but upper we have forestry industry, we have communities, livings, we have cities. So we have to work with all of them because it's not only about drilling, it's about to hold your relationship with all of them to obtain the permits to operate. So this is important. If you want to planning a biodiversity management action plan, excuse for the repetition, but biodiversity action plans will take account all of this. So you have to consider what are their expectations. If you are near to a fishery industry, you have to align your activities with them. So this is the future perspective, but from my opinion, this is a trend. In the last year, oil and gas companies are getting involved in biodiversity and ecosystem services. They are doing ecosystem services review, but we have to improve our management ladders of ecosystem services. This is really new for oil and gas, and we have to develop many guidelines of that. Understand the interdependence of our project needs to an interdisciplinary approach. It's not only about engineers and geologists, it's about how environmental teams could interact with them, could expose their ideas, could present or demonstrate the performance of the company in a way that will be clear for them. It's not only presenting numbers, it's about first to train this, to try to understand what are the environmental issues with their designs, and then how they can work with us to achieve for a better performance in biodiversity. Key indicators, we have to make an effort to measure our contribution to sustainability, not only for companies, but also for policymakers, because it's not the same to measure a forestry industry than an oil company. They have different impacts in environmental and different impacts for the sustainability of the country. So we have to be clear in that and make key indicators to measure this performance. And also we have to develop new technologies that reduce the impacts. We cannot have the risks to operate like in the 70s. We have more reputational pressures and more stakeholders' view in our design, so we have to find a way to do the same, but with less resource use and less land change. So for conclude, I think that what is happening in the future depends on what we are going to do today. So we have to remember that. So oil and gas company needs to work together with everyone. We have two opportunities about better stakeholders relations. We have to be clear, transparent, and we have to find a way to achieve that. And well, we have to build a strategy for biodiversity in all the companies. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have questions on the floor? You're invited. We'll just need to wait for the microphone to get over. And we'll be taking one or two more questions if there is.
Okay, thank you. My name is Lu Guoqiang. I'm from China. I work for the International Conference Office of China Ministry of Environmental Protection. One question for you is, I don't know if currently have Chinese oil and gas companies in your country. I don't know whether such companies have investment projects in your country, but I know many of China's mining companies, they have invested a huge, big size, large size mining projects in your country, in Peru. My question is, if such Chinese companies involved in your initiative program. Second question is, despite of there is or not, what I can do or how we can cooperate with you to help those Chinese companies involve such programs to contribute to the environmental protection and biodiversity conservation in Peru. Thank you.
Well, Peru is a highly sensitive country, and we have our economy depends on mining and oil and gas, firstly. I know that there's an important China's companies operating mining and oil and gas. So, in fact, there is a company near to the Chemisea program, which is the largest program in oil and gas in Peru. So I think that the most important is first to demonstrate. Oil and gas companies have legal requirements that they have to accomplish. But then they have to do voluntary actions that are more, for me, these are more important than the legal requirement, because we have many gaps in the legal requirements until today. So for Chinese company, my recommendation is trying to work with across sectors, to engage with other companies that have been developing programs in the area. Try to learn about how they are function, how are these experience contribute to communities, because the communities are really important with biodiversity programs in this country. And the other is to present that to the government. Unfortunately, not everyone knows what the companies are doing. There's kind of the myth that it's better you don't say nothing because you wouldn't have problems with the communities or with the governments. But you have to communicate. If you don't, when conflicts are going on, it's too late. So you have to be proactive in communicate and to invite them to talk with for the best starting point for the planning of the project. If you have this clear relationship, it's more honesty and it's more truthful. You can build trust with everyone in the country.
Thank you. I think we'll move on to our final presentation to be able to leave some time for common discussion at the end. So I want to invite Mr. Warwick Monstert, who is a biodiversity manager at the Beers company, and he'll give a view from that company's point of view. He has promised. So the floor is yours. You're welcome.
Thank you, Otto. There we go. Maybe before I start, let's get a bit of energy back in the room. Take 20 seconds, stand up, come on. Stand up. See a lot of heads going down. There shouldn't be such a doom and gloom topic. There we go, take a seat. So I'm from De Beers as a diamond mining company, and maybe I should have had a bit of an incentive to say, I'll hand out some of our product if you ask some interesting questions, but I don't want to promise something I can't deliver, but hopefully you can ask some good questions. So De Beers is obviously a mining company. We mine diamonds, primarily focused in southern Africa. We are owned by Anglo American, so we're effectively a business unit of Anglo American. That's an indication of where we operate globally. Obviously, there, from a De Beers perspective, we have a sort of a retail outlet component in terms of our product. And so there are a number of jewelry stores, so we, right throughout that. So that map is probably not as representative in terms of where our footprint is. A variety of minerals that Anglo American mines, and obviously at the bottom there, I'm going to speak about a De Beers approach in terms of our management of biodiversity. An extensive company, 150,000 employees, although I think given the sort of global and current economic outlook, that figure is changing as Anglo is busy divesting in quite a number of operations. So sadly that figure is going to come down, and I think that's just indicative of the global economy right now. So in terms of Anglo American, an interesting structure around De Beers. So De Beers, it's 85% owned by Anglo American and the other 15% owned by the government of Botswana, and that together makes up the De Beers family of companies. Just in terms of a bit of local relevance, Anglo has a prospecting project up in Finland, northern Finland, just north of Sodankla, Sakatti. That just gives it a bit of a local flavour. So how has, and I think just, really the point of today's talk is to try and pick up a little bit about what Tom was saying, is to say, there are so many commitments, there's so many recommendations. You've got, the Sustainable Development Goals, you've got recommendations coming out of the Arctic Biodiversity Assessment. So what I'm going to try and do is just bring, after each sort of slide, I'll try and see where it links to some of those recommendations of the Arctic Biodiversity Assessment. Admittedly, De Beers, it doesn't have an operation in Finland. We do, as I'll show you a bit later, some of our operations in Canada are probably right on the edge of the Arctic Circle, and so a lot of these initiatives are very relevant to us. We've heard a lot, the previous speakers talk about the mitigation hierarchy, so I'm not going to go into too much detail around it. Effectively, how we approach it right from the early days of avoidance, right through to the mitigation, and then ultimately you don't want to get to offsets. And I think that's one of the key things that we've looked at it from a De Beers perspective, just to say, you should be thinking about not having to get to that point of offsets if you apply the mitigation hierarchy correctly. What we also did is probably, and it was interesting that it was mentioned this morning around the approach, and I didn't quite get the sort of final answer about the no net loss approach from Finland, but we, as De Beers, put our heads probably above the parapet a bit, and we made a commitment to aiming to achieve no net loss of significant biodiversity. And I think it was really, it's an aspirational commitment. It was very difficult for us. We, at the time, companies like Rio Tinto were probably the forerunners in terms of having a net positive impact commitment. And so we did it. And I think what the bottom line is that it drives the right behavior within the company, and it forces you to not just be compliant, but it forces you to be proactive in terms of how you approach biodiversity. One of the other key components, and that's our environmental policy on the right there, is making a significant contribution in the areas in which we operate. Ernest Oppenheimer, at the time when he was then current chairman of Anglo American and De Beers, made a statement which, if you took it out of the sort of sustainability talk of today, is very relevant to today. And he said, we mine minerals and we mine, yes, to make a profit, but to do so in such a way that we can make a lasting contribution in the areas and into the areas that we operate and the people in those areas. And I think that really has sort of set the cornerstone around De Beers' environmental commitment, and as I said, going back 120 years of De Beers' mining history. We also got a statement and a key outcome in our policy is to not operate within World Heritage Site core areas, as well as respecting key biodiversity and protected areas. And it's in line with the ICMM commitments, as well as the Responsible Jewellery Council, have those very, very key commitments. So that really, Tom, is in terms of how we're addressing some of those key recommendations, and then it's an idea of where we are mainstreaming biodiversity right through to from our policy commitments through to our biodiversity standards, through to our biodiversity guidelines, all part of how we operate. So I think just in terms of how do you understand some of those biodiversity risks, and more importantly, where we see opportunities. And it's interesting, De Beers as a mining company is probably one of the only companies that is so closely linked to the product that we mine. If you're mining platinum, what your end product, you never really get to see it. Whereas for De Beers, we are so closely linked to the product. The diamond that we mine at the operation is the product that we sell, when you walk out the jewelry store with a diamond ring on your finger. And so reputation for us is an absolute key market driver. If there's something that's going to influence our reputation as a mining company, that obviously has a huge impact. So it's very important that we bring in that environmental performance, and in terms of how we communicate that to our stakeholders. So it probably does set us apart from other mining companies that, as I said, that we are so closely linked to our product. What it also gives us an opportunity to do is to look at where there are risks and opportunities, and I think that's obviously key. And it just, as I said earlier, drives that sort of continual improvement in terms of what we do on a day-to-day basis. That's a picture of an operation that we have in northern Canada, Gahcho Kué, which is just in project stage. So again, how are we doing it? We bring it at making sure that we are resilient, making sure that we have the right approach to that, with an approach around climate change. Water is obviously a key risk for us, and it's probably not as significant here in the European sort of areas, but certainly in Southern Africa, water is a key driver in terms of our business risk. And so that adaptation to climate change there is critical. What's also, I think, important and what sets us aside is looking at opportunities. We want to ensure that some of these outcomes deliver best practice. We actively engage on the business and biodiversity front to a point where in South Africa we are part and sort of founding partners of the South African Mining and Biodiversity Forum, which brings together companies, mining companies, extractives, the Department of Minerals, our Department of Environment, so government agencies, NGOs, academics, all together. And one of the very good outcomes that we've produced is a guideline, and I know some of the requirements, but there's too many guidelines, but there was definitely a niche for this. And so we produced the South African Mining and Biodiversity Guideline, which is available on our Chamber of Mines website, giving very clear steps and opportunities that businesses can look at to see where can they mainstream biodiversity. What it also gives us an opportunity, and we have a very close collaboration with research and academic institutions. And this is a project that's running up at Victor Mine in Northern Ontario in Canada, looking at the impact of the caribou herds in and around our mining operations. So we've actively engaged with universities, we actively engage with the researchers, and what we want is to share that information. I think it was a point also raised yesterday at the session around holding on to this information. And there's no point in reinventing the wheel. If the baselining and the work that you're doing there is getting done, by all means share it. And that's part of our sort of mandate, is to make sure that we share this information that we do get. And so that really looking at some of those individual stresses around your area operation. What are the potential impacts that you're going to have, and what can you do to actively engage with that? And again, a key step around mainstreaming biodiversity. So one of the things that we did is to say we've made this no net loss commitment. Well, how do we actually monitor it? How do you achieve it? So we set up a biodiversity value assessment, which really just looks at a methodology approach around how we assess biodiversity from a value perspective. It's been reviewed by Fauna and Flora International, and it's in-house. There's nothing out there. There was nothing off the shelf that we could take to say what works in South Africa, what's going to work in northern Canada, what's going to work off the west coast of South Africa, and what works in our marine environment. So admittedly, it is quite broad, but it does give us a clear indication around what are some of the biodiversity commitments and impacts around some of these operations. So it's underpinned by IFC Performance Standard 6. It's obviously, we've done a retrospective look at some of our operations. I mean, if you go back to Kimberley, we're not going to turn the clock back 120 years and say, well, we shouldn't have been mining there. But the retrospective assessments have been done. Again, an attempt to address how we incorporate resilience as well as some adaptation. So just a couple of key highlights from a Canadian operation. We've got two mines and one project. Victor and Snap Lake are mines at the moment. Gachukwe is a project which is in construction phase. And within it, there's a number of stresses in terms of things of what we're looking at. Habitat restoration around a stream diversion that we did at Victor, the impacts of, as I said, mentioned caribou and then bank and barn swallows. The commitment there is that after mining, 5 years after mining, there must be no visible sign of the mine. So that's quite an important commitment that's been made, and obviously we're going to stick to that. In Snap Lake, we've got a lot of work that's been done around some of our water monitoring and also looking at the impact of barren ground grizzly bears. In Gachukwe, a very interesting project around the construction. It's under a lake. And there's a very interesting project around actually closing off the lake, building a series of dikes, draining the lake, mining the kimberlite pipes, and then reflooding the lake. And together with the neighboring community have agreed that there's a fish out program. So they've actually been part of the program where they're removing the fish, and then are going to be part of the restocking exercise after that. So a very close collaboration with the local community there. Again, bringing in some of those ecosystem-based management options and looking at some individual stresses. So really just to sort of close off on the last two slides is an initiative which we've called the Diamond Route. If you Google the Diamond Route, you'll come up with a site. What it does, and this again I think just highlights the opportunity that mining companies probably quite miss. De Beers owns, in some instances, owns land. So we own over 180,000 hectares of conservation land that link diamonds to mining. It looks at a whole range of endangered species. We all know about the plight of our rhino population in South Africa. And so we're making significant contribution towards that in Botswana. The conservation area around our mine is actually now the single biggest protector of white rhino population in the country of Botswana, and that's happened within 2 years. But it's because of utilizing those land holdings from an operation point of view. So again, what it does is just help in terms of our knowledge and public awareness, as well as looking for these key areas that we are there because as a result of the mine being there, we have this opportunity to link them in terms of key biodiversity areas. There was a bit of talk about World Heritage Sites. Obviously, significance is a mining operation we have in northern South Africa, which actually is on the boundary of the Mapungubwe World Heritage Site, and we work very closely with that. Supporting biodiversity stewardship opportunities. The rest is quite South Africa specific, where we have very close lease agreements with our National Parks Authority. the land is actually owned by De Beers, and we've entered into lease agreements with the National Parks Authority to give them the land over, over a 99-year lease period. So you go into a national park, the land's actually owned by a mining company, but it's a conservation area, which I think is quite unique. Certainly, certainly unique in the mining industry, and probably unique even within business. Again, looking at important and identifying safe areas for that. So I think just the last slide is just really an idea around how do we seize on these opportunities. So mining companies have extensive areas under their license. It's not land owned, it's mining license areas. So over 1 million hectares, that graph on the right. The actual footprint that we impact on is 27,000 hectares, and the area that we actively manage for pure conservation, about 180,000 hectares. So a fantastic opportunity to say, how do you influence and how do you use some of these key areas that you have influence over from a management point of view to turn them. And then on the left, as I said, some of those 2 formal protected areas is in South Africa, our national parks, under a lease agreement, and looking at 40,000 hectares of land there. So really just an example of how working together with the mining company, using that collaborative work and the opportunities to say if there are particular areas of biodiversity significance, be it Natura 2000 sites, there is an opportunity to collaborate and get in with your NGOs and with your government over securing those protected areas. And I think that's the end of it. Thank you very much.
Do we have questions on the floor right away for Warwick? Thanks for energizing us a bit.
No diamonds yet, maybe.
We have a question in the back. You have the floor as soon as the microphone will get all the way there.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentations. My name is Jari Luukkonen. I'm working here in WWF Finland. You raised this one point from Finland, Sakatti, and of course I have to ask you now because we are in the seminar of biodiversity and business, and you also mentioned this guidelines that you respect these legally designed protected areas. And in Sakatti, actually, the proposed mine area is in the middle of one of the Natura 2000 sites, a Meyer-Aapa called Viiankiaapa. So it would be very interesting to hear from you, what concrete plans do you have to combine this biodiversity and business in that site?
Thank you. I mean, I think, as I said, so an interesting similarity is an operation that we've had in South Africa. Venetia mine is South Africa's biggest diamond mine. It was discovered in the 1980s at a time where the area was recognized as significant in terms of biodiversity, but there was no formal, there wasn't a national park. So there was a provincial nature reserve, but it didn't have protected area status. The mine was established, we put in extensive infrastructure to gain access to water. And through a period of negotiating at the time with government, is that they actually realized that it was a significant area for biodiversity. And so we worked together with them to say, as long as the infrastructure that was put in by the mine is obviously not going to be impacted on by if they said, well, we want to create a protected area, but you've got to take your infrastructure away. We said, well, the infrastructure is there, let's work together. And that is how so the mine is still carrying on. But actually, when they revised the buffer zone of the World Heritage Site. So it eventually became a national park, and then it was declared a World Heritage Site. And in that declaration, we found ourselves, the mine was actually within the core area of the national park and of the World Heritage Site. And, and I guess it was an opportunity to say, there's a mineral resource there. It's not, the footprint of the mine is not going to expand. And rather work together with a company, a responsible company, that has got a commitment to say, we're going to address closure operations. We've got long-term commitment in terms of the area. Then sort of having a blanket approach to say, either move your mining operation away or stop mining. And so I think, for Sakatti, I've got my colleague here who's actually the environmental lead of the project, can certainly answer a little bit more directly. But I think it's the finding that balance between a responsible mining company, the resource is there, and is the reality that the resource is ultimately going to be exploited at a stage? And do you then say, well, let's work with a company like Anglo American, who've got a long-term responsible approach to it, to say how can we best match the two together? I mean, I think, you know, if there was a yes/no answer, it would be very difficult. And I think there are commitments in certain areas where there are areas of high biodiversity which should be no-go areas. But there are also those other grey areas that perhaps with a little bit of clever collaboration with a responsible company that you can actually have both. And so a bit of a long-winded answer, but I think there's an opportunity to work together rather than, you know, have it as a no-go, because ultimately that resource is always going to be there. You know, it's one of the risks that we face is to say, and our legislation in South Africa is such that the protected area legislation can change, and so if there's a you know, a valuable enough resource, the minister can actually repeal that to say, you know, it's no longer a protected area and you can now mine it. But rather have it mined by a responsible company. I think that's the short answer.
Yeah, I think there's currently a. Oh yeah, you have the floor. And I think you can take your seat back, okay. Warwick, and then any questions addressed to you can be taken on from there.
Hello, I'm Päivi Karvinen from the Association of Environmental Impact Assessment here in Finland. And thank you for your presentation. And it was nice to know that you've been doing biodiversity value assessment. And I also suppose that as a mining company, doing environmental impact assessment is a normal procedure to do. How do you see the relationship between these two tools, environmental impact assessment and biodiversity value assessment? For example, is AIA not a tool strong enough to take into consideration biodiversity issues?
Thank you. So the environmental impact assessment is a regulatory requirement, which, you know, it gets done irrespective of you know, in other words, on getting that license to operate. The biodiversity value assessment is a complete company. It's not a requirement by any law. It's our own internal tool that we use to monitor how are we doing in terms of our performance around achieving no net loss of significant biodiversity. So they are quite separate. The information within the environmental impact assessment is obviously critical to use that as a baseline. So if we use that as to say, what was the state of biodiversity pre-mining? You've got a time of operation, you know, and in some cases, like I said, in Kimberley, 120 years of mining, and then assess at a series of sort of snapshots along that time what is changing in terms of that biodiversity. As new information becomes available, for instance, you know, protected areas get proclaimed or species information becomes available, we use the value assessment at a regular period every 3 years, is to say what's changing in the environment and are we still on track in terms of our commitment. So they're quite separate to the environmental impact assessment.
Are you the only mining company who is doing this biodiversity?
Please use the microphone if you're coming to.
Well, the question was, are we the only mining company that's using the biodiversity value assessment? As I said, you know, after we made the no net loss commitment, there isn't a one-size-fits-all tool that mining companies are using. And so Rio Tinto have got a slightly different approach. BHP Billiton had a slightly different approach, and there wasn't anything. And so what we did, you know, we said, well, okay, what we want is something that, as I said earlier, that can fit all of our operations from Southern Africa to Canada, and use it. But it's one of those things that we share, so we've shared it openly within our other operations within Anglo American. We've had it reviewed by SRK and other consulting firms to say, please, by all means, this is our own approach to it, and so there are other tools out there that are being used by other companies, but you know, this is one that we chose and we developed that would fit us.
And I think some similar tools have been developed in Finland and Canada and Chile by cross-platform actors. So there are very many different practices evolving. So there seems to be a kind of pressure to develop something of this kind. Does someone else in the panel want to come in on this question? So we have another question from the floor. You're invited.
Thank you. I'm Matt Smith from JNCC UK again. My question is, well, firstly, thank you very much for 4 excellent presentations. They were great. My question is to Warwick. And if I may kind of amalgamate 3 into 1. Firstly, I was wondering whether or not, in terms of the data and information you use for these assessments, whether or not that it's all primarily collected by De Beers and your associates, whether or not there's been any value or valuation done on your return on investments. And to go back to your point and talking about sharing data and open access, what your thoughts are on that presenting a threat to competitive advantage, which another individual in one of their presentations highlighted as a kind of a key driver for engaging with the biodiversity agenda.
Thank you, Matt. Yeah, I mean the first question around the data is no. So we use, and we've had a through Anglo American, we've actually had quite a long partnership with Project Proteus. And so the information that we're getting there, WCMC driven, particularly around protected areas. So we use that on a sort of a broad, high scale level. And then the actual, the project data is really from what we've gathered around some of our early baselines. And so that, in terms of valuation on our return on investment, at this stage, probably not. We haven't looked at that. And probably one of the reasons is around, as I said, it's quite a unique mining operation around, as I said, that link that we have with our product, with diamonds, which I think sets us apart in terms of any other mining company itself in some of the investments that we do. And then sharing, one of the things that we do through that Diamond Route initiative is to host an annual research conference. And so we've done it for 6 years, and we encourage any research that's been done. So it could either be as a result of your specialist studies in the early project phase with universities or even consultants to say, come and share that research. Because as I said, the worst thing is that you get all this fantastic data that gets collected. And it just either sits with a consultant or it sits with a university and nobody ever sees it. And we're saying, well, let's just share it, make it available. Because what's interesting, you often get other operations in areas that are mining, and don't go and spend again more time, more money, and more effort. Just make that information available. So we've got a research database on the website, on the Diamond Route website. Have a look, and you'll see a range of things from, as I said, from elephants and lions to caribou and barn swallows. So that's really something that we'd like to do.
Well, I would like to add some things. First, about the first questions, environmental impact assessment, I think that we have to change our thought in that. This is not only a legal requirement. Environmental impact assessments have to be a tool for managing risk. So it's not only about to have mere descriptions of the ecosystems. It's about how this information will be helpful for the policymakers and the decision makers in the company. So we have to present this information of the environmental impact assessment with a value. So maybe biodiversity value assessments or ecosystem services assessments are voluntary, but it has to be complemented with the environmental impact assessment. It mustn't be divorced. They have to be on hand at the same time, because how a company could measure the risk if it doesn't know what is happening or what could happen with his projects. So it's important to try to change these things. It's not like huge amount of data in papers. It's about how they could materialize in a simple way for decision and policymakers. And the other is about sharing knowledge. If company wants to share her lessons learned and share knowledge, what is happening is sometimes they have a lot of information, a lot of data, but they didn't realize that they have it. So first they have to organize the data, make a system to be able to everyone. Sometimes engineers that have to develop a project don't have the real information that they need. They don't need to understand all the modeling of the systems. They need to understand where is the higher risk of place a mining project or place a drilling area, because if they don't know, they couldn't avoid it. They always see what is happening under the ground. So sometimes they don't understand what happened out in the ground. So we have to make them visualize that. I thought that geographical information systems are important to that. So we have to make a geodatabase to share this information and standard the information, because at the end, decisions depends on what of the quality of the information that we have. If we don't have a standard baselines, if we don't have monitoring and review as with a scientific basis, it doesn't serve for anyone. It's just another data. So we have to make an effort to have quality and balancing the pragmatical of the data. So what are we doing and what is doing for? All the time in mind. And well, just another reflection about from my experience. I have 5 years in Repsol, and I think that the most difficult and the challenge that we have to face is to have communication plans. Not only for like marketing or saying what we are doing to do. It's about how we can improve our ways that we are doing. This partnership, these agreements, makes this space of communication, make clear channels of communicate things, and also give us ideas, new ideas, and improve best practices. So we have two kind of actions. Biodiversity, maybe we can measure the change in the long term, and it's important, but we have to do actions in the middle term, because we can't wait 5 years to make the decisions. Sometimes we have to do the decisions in the same day. So we have to make actions in 2 ways, in the middle term and in the long term, and balance there.
Yes, and a conservationist, I would say, in the immediate term often. I would like to open up...
Can I just make a quick comment to that?
Oh, yeah.
Because it's funny to hear my co-panelists talk about communication and openness to data and focus on ecosystem services. Because in CAF, we just recently completed earlier this year a scoping study on ecosystem services and considering how it's applicable in the Arctic. And our challenge was trying to engage business and industry in that process. So maybe we're just not communicating well enough to one another, but it's an interesting.
I see, Mitzi, you can come in just a moment, just to kind of encourage everyone also to come in with inputs. I know there's a number of very knowledgeable people in the audience, so it's not only for questions, but also for dialogue, bringing in new perspectives and input to the debate after Mitzi's input. You have the floor.
Actually, it's about the environmental impact assessment and the baseline information that you get from there. In the process of the EIA, there is such a thing as the risk assessment that is done, the output of which is an environmental management systems, wherein the ones that are really having the high risk are actually put into that environmental management systems, wherein monitoring of this particular issues or concerns are actually more frequent. And after the EIA has been conducted and everything has been, the environmental compliance certificate, that's how we call it in the Philippines, has been approved. And so there is such a thing as the preparation of the final mine rehabilitation and or decommissioning plan. Actually, it's a part of the EIA, but this one is a more extensive document that talks about mine closure. Mine closure that's temporary, mine closure that's sudden, and mine closure that's permanent. And having risk assessments in all of these scenarios will give you an idea exactly of what to prepare if in case there's a certain care and maintenance issue because of price, reduction of, no, it's really not reduction, but low price of ore, for example, so that they would stop operating for a while because if they operate, they will not profit from it. So there's the care and maintenance stage. And so what is the company to do during that stage? And the environmental management systems will actually put all the directions ready for them to base their activities on in terms of the social development and management program that will still have to continue, and for the royalty that has been stopped because of there's no output or there's no ore that will have to be priced, and no percentage that can be given to the indigenous peoples. So these things are actually risks that has been identified during the risk assessments. So, and for the permanent closure, from the beginning of even before the environmental impact assessment, there is already the foresight, a stakeholders consultation and stakeholders engagement along the way that's being done, so that all of them can plan out exactly what they would like to do as the final land use for that particular mining area. So that if that area, the stakeholders would want it to be a golf course, a community park, or with all those that are already present, the infrastructure for that matter, so that it becomes an option, not really going back to the land use that was originally in that particular area. So these are some of those ideas that somehow are outputs of an environmental impact assessment. Thank you.
Thank you. If there's nothing crucial on the floor, maybe we can raise the question that Jason Clay was raising with regards to agriculture in the larger hall. So I think we've seen through the ICMM and other initiatives during the last decade a number of companies going forward and engaging with biodiversity quite a lot, and I think that was also reflected in the presentations here. But the question is, how do we address the 25% or so that's not moving? And I think this question in the mining and extractive industries abroad is very relevant. And maybe you can also reflect that with regards to what the Unilever representative was saying of the relation between regulation and responsible business. Is there anyone in the panel who would like to respond to that? That's maybe two questions, but quite interrelated maybe.
I think that government has an important role in this. They have to regulate the activities, but they have to make incentive for the activities. For business, incentives are important too, because they are invest money, so invest implies a return of money. And the other point, especially in developing countries, is about the legality. So not all the companies are legal, so they operate without standards and the law and outside of the law. So the government has the power to avoid them with economical or environmental tools or punishments or something like that. But also they have to make incentive to legal business or legal companies to make more for biodiversity. So for me, this is the two key points to try to show to the directors, to the principals, to the investors that their money in the biodiversity will have a return. It's not only to access market, to reputational risk, they are very important, but in terms of business, they will be motivated.
Thanks. Anyone else?
Just a comment on what you're saying about what Jason mentioned this morning. He highlighted the role of reputation, and I think he also highlighted the amount of restoration work that needs to be done under that target too. And interestingly, again, a South African example is there's a particular province in South Africa which is incredibly rich in terms of its coal resource, and if you overlay and you look at where the mining license and applications are together with the industrial footprint, there is very little arable land left for agriculture. It's one of the most productive provinces in terms of South Africa for agriculture. But again, and I think I try to highlight it, is that when you look at a mining license area, you automatically assume that that's all going to be impacted on. And I think there's an opportunity to work with some of those mining companies to say, look, there is an exploitable resource. It is obviously going to be exploited from a country perspective, but there's a huge opportunity around the levels of restoration work that they can do on the other areas that are not going to be impacted. And it's a piece of work that we're looking at around food security and looking at areas where there isn't high biodiversity value, but there's an opportunity around agriculture. So your closure objective, I think it was mentioned, so you've got a long-term plan, and initially it was always about, well, let's return it to biodiversity or return it to some of a wilderness sort of perspective. But there's actually an opportunity to look at it from an agricultural and food production. And so, that's some of the things that we're trying to bring in from a mining and biodiversity forum to bring in the Department of Agriculture. Because often, it's neglected. It's always the Department of Environment or the Department of Forestry or Department of Water. But Department of Agriculture gets neglected, and I think there's a great opportunity to use a forum, be it if it hasn't been established yet, to bring in that and link it with some of these closure objectives and end land use plans for the mines, and get that built in to their closure plan. So I think there's an opportunity there.
I just would like to share one mining company that applied for an environmental impact assessment permit in the Philippines, and it involved 70% of the area is agricultural and 30% is forested. So the notion that biodiversity is only found in forested areas was clearly elucidated in the output of the environmental impact assessment. And so most of the biodiversity important species were just in the forested area, but the 70% were all rice, corn, and all other species. But what was neglected in that particular assessment was, when you say rice, there are indigenous rices, those that are hardy varieties that are being used by the indigenous peoples. And because they were not highlighted during the environmental impact assessment, so that particular aspect of it, their particular rice or rices for that matter, had not been considered. And so the seed banking component, for example, has not been done, that in case a certain, we do not want that to happen, tragedies or whatever, and all the rices of these indigenous cultures are eliminated or have not been saved because it was not identified in the environmental impact assessment. So it will just be lost because those.
I'm going to ask you to be a bit brief. We are running out of time, but you can still go on.
Okay, so that's it. So somehow, if there was that identified during the assessment that there's also that particular biodiversity that has to be pointed out, and it could have been, but then it did not materialize. It was not operational, so that's it.
Thanks a lot, and I'll give the final word to Tom. Maybe you can bring us back to the Arctic region if you may.
I think it sounds like a tough challenge as the only non-industry person on the panel. But it's very interesting to hear so much a focus on willingness to experiment or to be open with sharing data, to looking at valuation of services in the Arctic. And I think there's a lot of food for thought for us in the Arctic Council and the conservation of flora and fauna as we start to consider how we can implement the various actions that I put up on the screen during my presentation. And now that the discussion has touched on aspects of food security, which is a slightly different approach in the Arctic, because they were talking about maintenance of traditional ways of life, and puts a whole different perspective on it. But I think there's some very interesting thoughts that we'll take away from us, and hopefully will help us as we work to implement. And maybe in the future I'll come back and be able to say we did this, this, and this. Who knows? And if anyone is interested in talking to me afterwards about these, then please come and find me. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Tom, and thank you to the panel and the audience. And I think we'll go on in a while in the main room after coffee. So we'll get refreshed in the meantime. So thanks a lot for joining, and to be continued.